Hello and welcome in. I am Austin J. Moore at the University of Southern Mississippi. Today, I am not going to be going over the cultures of Islam and Muslims' realities, but instead European interpretations of Islam, hence the title of this podcast, A Student's Understanding of European Interpretations of Islam. Most, if not all, my sources have been collected by Dr. Joseph Peterson. I have been lucky enough to not only have taken his course here at the University of the Southern Mississippi, but also who have read his recent book, Sacred Rivals, both of which discuss similar topics and ideas. His class, being Islam in Europe from the Middle Ages to Refugee Crisis, is particularly interesting, especially when we touch on the title itself with this topic. The idea that Islam and Europe are two separate things is very particular and something that we touch within the class. It seems within a Western idea or a Western world that you can no longer be European or civilized if you are Muslim. However, we know this not to be the case, as Muslims have existed in Europe since Europe has been called Europe. The idea spills over from several historical events, many of which are discussed within his book, Sacred Rivals, which I am now going to begin a brief chapter by chapter discussion. Chapter 1 explains French and Christian ideas to judge the Muslims within Algeria, painting several concerns about their society and how they operate with religion. However, originally, Christians viewed them not as religious fanatics, but as potential converts. Chapter 2, again hitting on titles, Caesar and God, I believe to be a play on words. Caesar being the colonial or imperial power of the French state, struggling with power against the Catholic Church, attempting the mission to the local Islamic populations within Algeria. They both struggled with this alongside local controls for power, this time period being roughly beginning 1860. The colonial powers did not want Catholic missionaries to stir up too much trouble within Algeria and possibly cause a revolt. However, I would like to say that loyalties crossed the lines on several different occasions, as French administrators were also devout Catholics in many cases, and devout Catholics saw the idea of French power as a mode to gain converts, but also as French power as part of Catholicism. The ideas were not separate. Let's see, Chapter 4, the Crusade on Charity, and the 1870 massacre by the Dresdens on several Christian groups within the Ottoman Empire. They pushed for Napoleon III to do military operations within the area, but I don't believe, at least from reading from this book, that happened. Instead, it became a calling point for missionaries and French colonial powers to tighten their control within their own territories. Chapter 5 hits on this a little more with conspiracies, as the church begins to blame the Ottoman government itself for the massacre, believing that soldiers of the Ottoman army participated and that the government organized the massacre, claiming to have also disrespected France, several people dying upon the French flag or French statues, symbolizing in a way Jesus' own sacrifice, attempting to unify the idea of French colonial power and religion once again in a way. Chapter 6 explains the practices of the Great White Fathers and their somewhat successful conversions within Algeria and other African or French territories. They were the first to use photographs of children within their orphanages and allow people back home at France to adopt them and raise funding. They even had two brothers. I apologize for the pronunciation, the Klibs brothers, that they took all the way back to France, but because of their conversion, however, they ended up returning back to their own populations. I do not know if they actually ended up converting back to Islam or not. However, the priests and missionaries that ended up converting them expressed great disappointment and somewhat rage in this, turning them away from Catholic ideas of saving Islam and instead believing them to be religious fanatics and beginning into scientific racism about the Arab race as a whole. Chapter 7 expands on the harsh treatment that the orphans experienced within the Great White Father's orphanages and others, explaining how 3 brothers ended up going all the way to France, becoming doctors, mistreated while in France, and being denied marriage there. One even returning to Algeria, having been adopted by a French family, converted to Catholicism, and marrying a French woman, and yet treated as a second-class citizen within Algeria. When comparing this with what I have been taught on the class, it's a power struggle between locals for their right to be equal with European neighbors and the Catholic Church and colonial administrators, with loyalty lines all over the place, and several lines being crossed and crisscrossed, overlapped, and back and forth on one another as people's lives develop and their needs change. Some notes on the reading is that the author himself suggests that you skip chapter 1 as it's mainly analytical. However, the most important part of his book is the stories of human relations, such as the brothers. I do apologize as I do not have names, as I feared I would mispronounce them. But when relating this book to the class, the idea of European interpretations of Islam become increasingly racialized as failure to convert Arabs specifically, and the colonial powers struggle to maintain power become increasingly difficult. It becomes increasingly racialized. To the point to where when you get to the Battle of Algiers, which we have watched a movie on within the 1970 movie Battle of Algiers, depicting the situation, they have placed all of the Arab community, people of Muslim dress, into a small fraction of the city, almost ghetto-like situations. And when military control takes over, even barbed wires the community outside and attempt manual searches on every single individual before they leave the perimeter. I would like to thank you for making it this far, and I wish you all a lovely day. Goodbye.